The call came at 6:12 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I hadn't even finished my coffee yet. My phone buzzed across the kitchen counter, and when I saw my dad's name on the screen, I knew something was wrong immediately, because my father never called that early. Never. Evan. His voice sounded strained, confused, tired. The kind of tired that doesn't come from sleep. It comes from humiliation. They took my truck. I froze. What? My truck, he repeated quietly. It's gone. I grabbed my keys instantly. Stay inside. I'm coming. My father, Walter Hayes, was a disabled Marine veteran, 72 years old. Bad knee, spinal injury from his second deployment. Walked with a cane most days and used a mobility lift installed in the side of his pickup truck. That truck wasn't just transportation. It was independence. Without it, getting groceries felt impossible. Doctor appointments became a battle. Even leaving the house became complicated. And somebody had taken it. I drove straight to his neighborhood, Willow Creek Estates, one of those HOA-controlled communities obsessed with appearances, perfect lawns, matching mailboxes, and neighbors who treated parking rules like federal law. The second I pulled into Dad's driveway, I saw the empty spot, the wheelchair ramp beside the garage, the oil stain where the truck had sat for years. Gone. Dad was sitting on the porch holding paperwork in shaking hands. Not angry. That's what hurt the most. He looked embarrassed, like he thought somehow this was his fault. What happened? I asked. He handed me the notice. Vehicle removed due to HOA noncompliance. Reason: unauthorized commercial vehicle and expired parking exemption. I read it twice, then a third time, because my brain genuinely refused to process the stupidity. Commercial vehicle? It was a disabled veteran pickup truck with mobility modifications. And then I saw the signature at the bottom. Linda Harper, HOA president. Of course, every neighborhood has one. The person who mistakes authority for importance. She came by yesterday, Dad said quietly. She said the truck violated community standards. I looked at him. What did you tell her? That it's medically necessary. And he hesitated, then looked away. She said rules apply equally to everyone. That sentence hit me harder than it should have, because people like Linda always hide behind words like equal. Even when equal treatment creates unequal damage. Did she see the disability plates? I asked. Dad gave a tired laugh. She stared at them for 5 minutes. I clenched my jaw, because now this wasn't ignorance. This was intentional. Where's the truck now? Dad handed me another paper. Toll yard information. 30 miles away. Storage fees already increasing by the hour. That alone told me something important. This wasn't about enforcement. It was punishment. I stood up immediately. We're getting it back. Dad didn't move. Just looked down at the porch floor. I told her your mother bought that truck before she passed, he said quietly. She didn't care. That was the moment I stopped seeing this as an HOA dispute. Because when someone ignores humanity that deliberately, they eventually cross the wrong line. And Linda Harper had no idea how wrong this line was about to become. The tow yard smelled like rust, oil, and bad decisions. Rows of impounded cars lined the fence. Most looked abandoned, forgotten. Dad's truck stood near the back. Mobility lift attached. Disabled veteran plate still visible. A huge yellow violation sticker slapped across the windshield. I walked straight into the office. The clerk looked up lazily. Can I help you? Yes, I said. Who authorized towing a disabled veteran vehicle? He typed something into the computer, then paused. Oh, that reaction mattered. What? He shifted awkwardly. HOA priority request. Meaning? They insisted immediate removal was required. I leaned closer. For what emergency? No answer, because there wasn't one. He handed me the release paperwork. The total was already over $1,800. Toll fee, storage fee, administrative fee, priority removal fee. It was legalized extortion. And then I noticed something strange. At the bottom of the paperwork was a small notation. Federal Vehicle Accessibility Permit Registered. I looked up immediately. What's this? The clock frowned. Honestly, I don't know. I pointed at the screen. That permit. What is it? He read it again. Then his face changed slightly. Oh, wait. Wait, what? He swallowed. This vehicle is flagged under federal accessibility protection. Now it was my turn to pause. What does that mean? It means towing authorization usually requires additional clearance. Silence. A long silence. Because suddenly the situation wasn't just cool. It might have been illegal on a completely different level. Who approved it anyway? I asked slowly. The clock looked nervous now. Linda Harper signed direct authorization. There it was again. Her name. Attached to another bad decision. But this time, something felt different. Bigger. I paid the fees. Didn't argue. Didn't yell. Because instinct told me something important was coming. And I was right. Because less than 24 hours later, 2 black SUVs pulled up outside Linda Harper's house. And they weren't from the HOA. The neighborhood noticed the SUVs immediately. Of course they did. Nothing unusual ever happened in Willow Creek Estates unless it involved someone's grass being too tall or a mailbox painted the wrong shade of white. So when 2 black government SUVs rolled slowly through the entrance gates at 8:03 a.m. the next morning, people stared. Curtains moved. Front doors cracked open. Coffee cups paused halfway to mouths. Because everyone understood one thing instantly. Those vehicles didn't belong to the HOA. I was in my dad's driveway helping reconnect a mobility lift onto his truck when my phone buzzed. Tom Jenkins, Dad's next-door neighbor, retired electrician, neighborhood gossip with binocular-level awareness. You seeing this? He whispered immediately. Seeing what? Feds. I stopped tightening the lift bracket. What? 2 black SUVs just pulled up at Linda Harper's house. That got my attention fast. You serious? Dead serious. Suits too. I looked toward Dad. He was sitting quietly in the garage watching me work. Still exhausted from yesterday. Still shaken. Stay here, I said. Dad frowned. What's going on? I don't know yet. But deep down, I already had a feeling. By the time I reached the next street over, half the neighborhood were pretending not to watch. People watering already wet lawns. Checking mailboxes that were empty, walking dogs that clearly did not need walking. Classic HOA suburb surveillance. Linda Harper's house sat near the corner. Perfect landscaping. Perfect shutters. Perfect little kingdom. And parked directly outside it, 2 black Chevrolet SUVs with federal plates. Not police. Not county officials. Federal. 2 men in dark jackets stood near the front door speaking calmly with Linda. And for the first time since I'd known who she was, she didn't look confident. She looked confused. One of the agents held paperwork. The other occasionally glanced toward the truck parked in her driveway. Not her SUV. Not her house. Her expressions. Watching reactions. That's when I noticed something else. Linda wasn't angry. She was nervous. That mattered. Because people like Linda only get nervous when they realize rules above theirs exist. I stayed across the street near Tom's mailbox. Tom walked over quietly. Told you, he muttered. You hear anything? Only that one of them asked about a federally protected accessibility registration. My stomach tightened slightly. The permit, the one listed on Dad's tow paperwork. I looked back toward the house. One of the agents handed Linda another document. She visibly stiffened after reading it. Then came the moment everything shifted. She looked directly toward the tow company owner standing beside the agents, and suddenly started talking fast. Too fast. Even from across the street. Panic looks obvious. The tow company owner raised both hands immediately. Defensive posture. Not argumentative. Scared. One of the agents remained completely calm, writing notes, watching everyone carefully. That's when I realized this wasn't random. This was already an investigation. My phone rang again. Unknown number. Washington, D.C. area code. I answered slowly. Hello. Mr. Hayes. Yes. This is Special Agent Daniel Mercer. We'd like to ask a few questions regarding your father's vehicle. I stared toward Linda's house. You're the FBI. Yes. That sentence still felt unreal. Why exactly is the FBI involved in a towing dispute? A brief pause. Then, because your father's truck is federally registered under a Protected Veteran Mobility Assistance Program. I stopped breathing for a second. What does that mean? It means an authorized interference may constitute federal violations. There it was. The sentence Linda Harper never expected to exist. Federal violations. The agent continued. We understand the vehicle was removed despite disability protection indicators and accessibility registration warnings. Yes, I said slowly. She knew exactly what it was. Can you confirm she personally authorized the tow? Oh, absolutely. I still had the paperwork, signed by her, directly, confidently. The agent's tone remained professional. But sharper now. Did your father explain the medical necessity of the vehicle before removal? Yes. And I looked toward Linda again, still speaking rapidly to the agents outside. She said rules apply equally to everyone. Silence on the line for a second, not confusion, processing. Then Agent Mercer spoke again. Would appreciate copies of all communication, notices, and towing documents. You will have them. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. The line disconnected. Tom stared at me. Well, I looked back toward the SUVs. They are not here because of the tow. What then? I exhaled slowly. They are here because she interfered with a federally protected disability vehicle. Tom's eyes widened. Oh, yeah, oh, because suddenly this was an HOA drama in the mall. This was federal territory. And people like Linda never understand how dangerous that shift is until it's already happening. Across the street, one of the agents turned slightly and looked around the neighborhood. Calm, observant, methodical. Linda was still talking, trying to explain, trying to justify, trying to regain control of a situation already slipping away from her. But federal agents don't care about HOA authority. They care about documentation, violations, intent, and intent was about to become Linda Harper's biggest problem, because she didn't tow just any truck. She towed a disabled veteran's federally protected mobility vehicle, after being warned exactly what it was. And now the people investigating it had arrived at her front door. By noon, the entire neighborhood knew something was wrong. Not HOA gossip wrong, real wrong, the kind that changes how people speak when they say your name. Nobody had seen Linda Harper leave her house all morning. That alone was unusual. Normally, she practically patrolled the neighborhood like a self-appointed sheriff. Clipboard, perfect smile, violation notices ready like ammunition. But now, her blinds were closed, and federal SUVs were still parked outside. That image spread through Willow Creek faster than wildfire. People started texting screenshots from security cameras. Neighborhood Facebook groups exploded. Speculation everywhere. Did she get arrested? Is this fraud? Why are federal agents involved? The HOA board tried to control it immediately. That was their instinct. Containment. At 1:17 p.m., an official HOA email hit everyone's inbox. Recent events involving board leadership are being reviewed internally. Residents are advised not to spread misinformation, which, of course, guaranteed everyone spread it faster. I was sitting at Dad's kitchen table reviewing paperwork with him when another email came through. This one wasn't from the HOA. It was from Agent Mercer. Request for documentation. Attached. Towing authorization request. HOA enforcement notice. Accessibility permit inquiry. Federal compliance review request. Dad adjusted his glasses slowly. What exactly does federally protected mean? He asked quietly. I leaned back in the chair. I'm still figuring that out. The truth was, I didn't fully understand it either. But Harris, the attorney I called earlier that morning, explained it clearly enough. Your father's truck wasn't just modified, he said over speakerphone. It was registered through a federally assisted veteran mobility accessibility program. Dad frowned slightly. That was years ago. Harris nodded. Doesn't matter. Those protections stay active. That's when it clicked. Linda didn't just tow a truck. She interfered with federally recognized medical accessibility equipment tied to a disabled veteran. And according to Harris, that changes everything. Can she actually get in legal trouble for this? I asked. Harris laughed once. Not humor. Disbelief. She already is. That silence afterward hit hard, because suddenly this whole situation felt bigger than neighborhood drama, bigger than fines, bigger than HOA power trips. This had crossed into federal oversight territory, and those agencies don't operate like HOA boards. They don't bluff. Outside, I noticed movement near the street. 3 different neighbors standing together pretending to casually talk while staring toward Linda's house. Fear had entered the neighborhood. Not fear of crime. Fear of exposure. Because if Linda could do this to a disabled veteran publicly, what else had she done quietly? That question started spreading fast. By evening, stories began surfacing. One neighbor claimed Linda fined a widow $600 over a medical ramp. Another family said she threatened legal action over a service dog fence exemption. Someone else mentioned an authorized towing threats from last year. Patterns. That's what investigators look for. Patterns. And Linda Harper was starting to look less like a strict HOA president, and more like someone who believed rules made her untouchable. At 6:40 p.m., Tom Jenkins called again, breathing fast, excited. You need to hear this. What now? The HOA board just called an emergency meeting. About Linda, they are trying to distance themselves. Of course they were. That's what organizations do when liability shows up. They sacrifice the person closest to the fire. What are they saying? I asked. That she acted independently. There it was, the first betrayal, because just yesterday she represented the board completely. Now she was becoming an individual problem. Tom lowered his voice, and apparently the FBI asked for HOA communication records. I sat up immediately. What records? All towing approvals, violation notices, internal emails. That was huge, because if agents were requesting internal communication, they weren't investigating one tow in the mall. They were investigating behavior. Patterns again. Dad stayed quiet through most of the conversation, then finally asked something simple. Why would anyone do this over a truck? I looked at him, then toward the window where his pickup sat safely in the driveway again, because she thought she could. That was the truth underneath everything. Not law, not compliance, not regulations. Control. And people addicted to control eventually stop recognizing limits. That night, the black SUVs finally left Linda's house. But the damage stayed behind. Because once federal agents knock on your door in a neighborhood ruled by appearances, everyone notices. And nobody forgets. Especially not the HOA board now desperately trying to save itself. Because they were beginning to realize something terrifying. If Linda Harper broke federal law while acting as HOA president, the investigation might not stop with her. The next morning, Willow Creek Estates felt different. Quieter. Not peaceful quiet. Careful quiet. The kind people use when they think someone might be listening. No HOA golf carts driving around. No violation notices hanging on doors. No Linda Harper marching through the neighborhood with her clipboard like she owned the streets. For the first time in years, the HOA looked nervous. I was outside helping Dad clean out the truck bed when a black sedan pulled slowly into the driveway. Not federal this time. Legal. Harris stepped out holding a thick folder. His expression told me immediately the situation had escalated overnight. That bad? I asked. He looked toward Dad's truck, then back at me. Worse for them than you. That got my attention. We sat at the kitchen table while Dad made coffee. Harris opened the folder carefully. Inside were printed emails, HOA records, internal communications. How did you get those? I asked. Someone on the board is scared, he replied. That made sense. Fear leaks information faster than anger ever does. Harris slid one document toward me. Subject line, Veteran Vehicle Removal Approval, signed directly by Linda Harper. But underneath that, another message caught my eye. Are we sure this is legal? Sent by another board member. 3 days before the tow. I looked up immediately. She was warned. Harris nodded. More than once. Another email. Vehicle appears federally registered under accessibility exemption. Another board member responded. Then maybe we should leave it alone. And then came Linda's reply. Rules apply equally. Proceed with removal. The room went silent, because there it was. Intent. Documented. Not misunderstanding. Not confusion. Decision. Dad slowly lowered his coffee cup. She knew, he said quietly. Yeah, I replied. She knew. Harris leaned back slightly. That email changes everything. Because now investigators didn't need to prove ignorance. They had proof she was warned beforehand. That's a difference between mistake and liability. Another document slid across the table. Tow authorization request. Priority enforcement. Immediate removal. No grace period. She pushed this hard, Harris said. I frowned. Why? That's the interesting part. He handed me another page. Property valuation notices. Parking complaints. Community aesthetic concerns. Then I saw it. Dad's truck had become the center of multiple HOA complaints recently filed by Linda herself. Not neighbors. Huh. And suddenly it made sense. The truck embarrassed her idea of a perfect neighborhood. The mobility lift, the veteran plates, the medical modifications. To Linda Harper, it wasn't a disabled man's independence. It was visual noncompliance. And she decided appearances mattered more than legality. That realization made me angrier than the tow itself, because cruelty disguised as policy is still cruelty. Outside, another car pulled into the driveway suddenly. Fast. Nervous. Sandra Whitmore from the HOA board stepped out, looking over her shoulder before approaching the house. Harris looked surprised. She came here? Apparently. I opened the door carefully. Sandra's face looked pale, stressed, like she hadn't slept. We need to talk, she said immediately. Not hello. Not polite conversation. Straight fear. We let her inside. The moment she saw the document spread across the table, her expression changed. Not shock. Recognition. You already have the emails, she whispered. Harris crossed his arms. You brought more. She nodded slowly, then reached into her purse. Another folder, thicker than the first one. My stomach tightened slightly. What's in there? I asked. Sandra hesitated, then finally said the sentence that changed everything. She's done this before. Silence. Real silence. Because now this wasn't one incident anymore. It was a pattern. Sandra opened the folder carefully. Inside were copies of previous complaints. Threats. Enforcement notices. Disability disputes. Accessibility conflicts. RAM violations. Medical equipment complaints. Service animal disputes. Every single one connected to Linda Harper. Dad looked genuinely stunned. She went after disabled residents. Sandra nodded slowly. She said accommodations lowered property values. That sentence sat in the room like poison. Harris leaned forward immediately. Did the board know about this? Sandra looked ashamed. Some of us suspected. Suspected? Harris interrupted sharply. She controlled everything, Sandra said quickly. Most people were afraid to challenge her. There it was again. Fear. The real currency behind bad HOAs. Not authority. Fear. Sandra slid one final document across the table. Federal inquiry notice. Sent to the HOA early that morning. The FBI wasn't just requesting towing records anymore. They were requesting accessibility enforcement complaints, internal communications, discrimination-related disputes, HOA board authorization history. This had expanded. Fast. Harris looked at me slowly. They are building a patent case. And Linda Harper? She probably still thought this was about one truck. But it wasn't anymore. It was about years of power use against the wrong people. Until someone finally pushed back with enough evidence to expose all of it. And now, the entire HOA board was starting to realize something terrifying. The FBI didn't come because of a parking violation. They came because Linda Harper's decisions may have crossed into federal disability discrimination territory. And federal investigations don't stop just because an HOA gets nervous. 3 days later, the FBI came back. This time, they didn't come quietly. No discreet parking. No calm conversation at the door. No informal questions. This time there were 4 vehicles. 2 black SUVs. a federal transport sedan, and local police backup. Willow Creek estates practically stopped breathing. Neighbors froze mid-walk. Garage doors stayed half open. People watched from windows pretending not to, because deep down, everyone understood something now. This was no longer an HOA dispute. This was an investigation. I was in Dad's garage adjusting the wheelchair lift when Tom Jenkins nearly sprinted across the lawn. "They are back," he whispered loudly. I looked up immediately. "Who?" "The FBI." Dad slowly set down his coffee. The expression on his face wasn't satisfaction. It was disbelief, like he still couldn't fully accept this was happening because of his truck. We walked outside together. From the end of the driveway, we could see Linda Harper's house clearly. Federal agents were already approaching the front door. Purposeful, prepared, and unlike last time, they carried boxes, evidence boxes, that changed the atmosphere instantly. Because questions are one thing, collection is another. Dad leaned slightly on his cane. "She really got herself into trouble," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "She walked into it." The front door opened. Linda appeared, and for the first time since this entire situation started, she looked completely overwhelmed. No perfect posture, no confident smile, no clipboard, just panic trying to stay organized. One of the agents handed her paperwork. Another stepped inside, then another. Search warrant. Tom looked at me. "Oh, man." "Yeah, oh, man." Because federal agencies don't execute warrants unless they already believe evidence exists. And judging by Sanders' files, they had plenty. The neighborhood stayed frozen, watching, whispering, recording from behind curtains. HOA power works through appearances. And nothing destroys appearances faster than federal agents walking in and out of your house carrying evidence boxes. An hour later, Harris called me. "You seeing this?" he asked immediately. "Everyone's seeing it." He sounded serious, more serious than before. "They've expanded the investigation." "How far?" "Civil rights violations, accessibility discrimination, possible fraud tied to enforcement penalties." I looked toward Linda's house again. Agents were now carrying computer equipment out the front door. Laptops, file containers, external drives. "They are taking everything," I said quietly. "That means digital records matter now," Harris replied. "And digital records tell the truth most people forget exists. Emails, messages, approvals, intent, especially intent. Any idea what triggered the warrant?" I asked. A pause. Then, one of the board members cooperated fully. "Sandra. Had to be. Fear always flips the first person closest to damage." Harris continued. "They apparently found evidence Linda intentionally targeted medically exempt residents." That sentence made my stomach tighten. Not because it surprised me anymore, because it confirmed exactly how far this had gone. Dad stayed quiet while I relayed everything, then finally asked something simple. Why would somebody hate disabled people that much? I looked at him carefully. "I don't think she hated disabled people," I said slowly. "I think she hated anything she couldn't control." That felt more accurate, because people like Linda don't see humanity first. They see inconvenience, imperfection, exceptions to their rules. And over time, they stop seeing people completely. Around noon, the HOA board released another public statement. Short, cold, desperate. Linda Harper has been permanently removed from all leadership responsibilities pending federal review. Pending federal review. That phrase spread through the neighborhood instantly, because HOA residents fear one thing more than fines: exposure. And now exposure had arrived in black SUVs carrying federal badges. By evening, more stories surfaced publicly. Not rumors anymore, official complaints. Residents started coming forward. A mother whose autistic son's therapy van was repeatedly targeted. A veteran threatened over wheelchair ramp visibility. An elderly resident fined for oxygen equipment storage. Every story pointed back to Linda. Every pattern looked worse. And now investigators had records proving she ignored warnings repeatedly. That matters legally. A lot, because mistakes can be defended. Patterns can't. Just before sunset, Agent Mercer called again. "Mr. Hayes." he said calmly. "We may need your father to provide a formal statement." "Of course." A brief pause. "Then, your documentation helped establish intent." There it was again. Intent. The word destroying Linda Harper piece by piece. Because she didn't accidentally tow the truck. She knowingly approved it after multiple warnings. And federal investigators love documented intent. Before hanging up, Agent Mercer said one final thing. "This investigation likely extends beyond towing violations." I looked toward the darkening street outside, toward the silent HOA president's house, toward the neighbors still watching from windows. "How bad is it?" I asked quietly. His answer came without emotion. "Bad enough that we came back with a warrant." And suddenly Willow Creek Estates understood something terrifying. The woman who spent years enforcing neighborhood rules might have broken laws far bigger than any HOA could protect her from. 2 weeks after the FBI raid, Willow Creek Estate stopped feeling like an HOA neighborhood. It felt like a crime scene with trimmed hedges. The silence was different now. Not peaceful, careful, ashamed. No one talked proudly about community standards anymore. No one walked around measuring lawns or checking mailbox colors. Because suddenly everyone understood something important. Rules sound very different when federal agents start reading them. Linda Harper hadn't been seen publicly since the warrant execution. Rumors spread constantly. Some said she hired attorneys from out of state. Others claimed she was blaming the HOA board entirely. One person swore she was trying to sue the tow company. But none of that mattered anymore, because the investigation had already moved beyond her control. And once the federal government starts collecting evidence, personal excuses stop mattering very quickly. Dad and I sat on the porch one evening watching the sunset reflect off his truck. Back where it belonged. Mobility lift repaired. Veteran plates polished clean again. "You know," he said quietly, "I almost apologized to her that day." I looked at him. "What?" "When she told me the truck violated community appearance rules." That made my stomach tighten instantly. "Why would you apologize?" Dad shrugged slightly. The kind of tired shrug older people carry after years of avoiding conflict. "Because after a while," he said, "people in authority make you feel like existing is the inconvenience." That sentence hit harder than anything else in this entire situation, because it explained exactly how people like Linda survived for so long. Not through laws, through intimidation, through exhaustion, through making decent people feel guilty for needing accommodation. And that's why this mattered beyond one truck. A few days later, Harris called with the update everyone had been waiting for. They are filing federal civil rights charges. I sat up immediately. Against Linda, and potentially others depending on board involvement. There it was, the line every HOA member feared crossing. Federal civil rights territory. Harris explained that investigators uncovered years of documented enforcement targeting disabled residents disproportionately. Emails, internal complaints, selective towing, accessibility disputes, and worst of all, Linda repeatedly ignored legal warnings. That's what destroyed her, not arrogance, documentation, because arrogance alone isn't illegal. But documented discrimination? That's different. The HOA board collapsed almost immediately afterward. 3 members resigned within 48 hours. The management company terminated its contract. Emergency legal notices were mailed to residents. And for the first time in years, the neighborhood had no one policing it. You'd think chaos would follow. It didn't. In fact, the neighborhood got calmer. Kinder. More human. People started helping each other instead of reporting each other. Neighbors introduced themselves after living side by side for years without speaking. One family even helped repaint Dad's fence for free after hearing what happened. Fear had disappeared. And fear was a real thing the HOA had been running on all along. Then came the final shock. Local news picked up the story. Not because of the HOA, because of the veteran angle. Disabled Marine veterans truck illegally towed. Federal investigation expands into HOA practices. That headline spread everywhere. Suddenly, Willow Creek Estates wasn't known for perfect lawns anymore. It was known for federal investigators and discrimination allegations. Irony works like that sometimes. One evening, Tom walked over holding his phone and laughing so hard he could barely breathe. "You got to see this." "What?" He handed me the screen. An online real estate listing. Linda Harper's house. For sale. Fast sale. Price reduced. Dad stared at the screen for a long moment, then quietly said, "She can't stay here anymore." No, she couldn't, because authority built on fear collapses completely once people stop being afraid. A month later, Agent Mercer called one last time. "The investigation is moving toward formal prosecution," he said. "Can I ask something?" I replied, "Go ahead." Was it really the truck that triggered all this? A brief silence. Then, "No," he said, "the truck exposed it." That sentence stayed with me, because it was true. Linda Harper didn't fall because she towed one vehicle. She fell because years of unchecked power finally met evidence. And evidence doesn't care about HOA titles, or neighborhood status, or community rules. It only cares about truth. That night, Dad sat beside his truck for a while before heading inside, just quietly appreciating the fact that it was there, safe, untouched, his. "You know what the funny part is?" he said before going inside. "What?" "I spent years thinking people like her were too powerful to fight." I looked at the truck, then toward the quiet neighborhood around us. "No," I said, "they just counted on nobody pushing back." And in the end, that was Linda Harper's real mistake. She thought towing a disabled veteran's truck would make her look powerful. Instead, it brought the FBI to her front door.